Hello, greetings from New York City. I'm Jeffrey Christian, managing partner and founder of CPM Group. I'm going to be speaking to you today about new energy vehicles and electric vehicles and their potential impact on various metals. We use the term new energy vehicles because, quite frankly, we're not quite sure what the future of motive propulsion technologies will be. We're a little bit skeptical about electric vehicles. We're very skeptical that they can come in and be commercialized and take market share as quickly as other people think they can. And we wouldn't be surprised to see if electric vehicles actually become a transition technology where you see a movement toward electric vehicles over the next 10, 20 years, but then a shift away from them to something else, perhaps hydrogen engines or some other technology that we don't even think of right now. Don't have a lot of time today, but what I'll try to do is give you a high-level briefing on things. Just to qualify myself a little bit, I've been studying energy markets, alternative energy technologies, and other commodities since the 1970s. I started studying energy markets in 1975 while at university. You can see here in 1979, I wrote a book on electric vehicles. The theme of which was basically that these electric vehicle technologies were decades away from being commercially viable, and I was going to get into metals research. I have made a name for myself in precious, base, and specialty metals research, but we continue to do energy technologies, energies, and other commodities research over the years. So we've been watching this space for a long time, and we're involved in it in a number of levels. The themes that I want to give you in our limited time today is that automotive propulsion technologies are changing, but the future of what motive propulsion technology is not at all clear. It's far less cloudy and uncertain than a lot of people seem to believe it is. Which technology or technologies will win is not certain. Which metals will be used in those technologies and what volumes of those metals are not certain either. I'll talk about that in a bit. In addition to that, I think the realistic projections of EVs and other new energy vehicles market penetration are much slower than many metal market guesses would have them to be. And that's because there are a lot of limitations on how fast these technologies can be broadly introduced into a market that uses 100 or 120 million new vehicles a year. The limitations include electricity generation. There's not enough electricity to supply electric cars as well as everything else in most countries in the world. The electricity distribution grid is insufficient to handle such electricity in virtually every country with the possible exception of Germany. The capital requirements of tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars of new factories to build motors and drivetrains and controllers is incredibly constrained. And a lot of the equipment manufacturers that supply the auto manufacturers are capital constrained. The auto manufacturers are not giving them the kinds of assurances that they'll even want the technologies that they want, the motors or the controllers that they think they might need in the future now, because the technology keeps changing so fast. Those technological uncertainties will have a drag on how fast we can move because you're not going to be able to make the machinery to make the vehicles that quickly. And finally, the emissions on electricity generation are really high, and it's being overlooked. It's being swept under the rug, really, by politicians and other people who are promoting electric vehicles as clean vehicles. All you're doing is moving the pollution away from the street level to where the electricity is generated, unless you move to nuclear power. Wind and solar and hydro will help, but they're not going to replace hydrocarbons and or nuclear in the foreseeable future. The battery demands for lithium, manganese, and cobalt will shift. We've seen that already. the projected amount of cobalt that will be needed for lithium-ion batteries is 33% less today than it was 2-3 years ago. And another 50% cut from the 33% reduction we've already seen is projected for the next few years. So how much cobalt, whether we'll even need cobalt, much less how much, is up for grabs. And that is true for many other metals too. Nickel and copper seem much more interesting. Platinum group metals are being underweighted right now because people don't realize the extent to which we're going to continue to burn diesel and gasoline in vehicles for at least the next 30 or 40 or 50 years, even if everything goes well on a transition to a new form of mode of propulsion. Uranium, if you're going to be using electric vehicles, you're going to have nuclear power to generate that electricity, and uranium will be an interesting metal to watch. Lithium and cobalt, we saw them rise sharply in prices on the hype. We saw them come down when people realized that the hype was overhyping demand. Substitution, recycling, and other limitations are coming in. 2 years ago, we were told that CPM Group was the only company that had lithium recycling from spent batteries in our projections for lithium supply, demand, and price over the next 10 years. If you're going to be using lithium-ion batteries in tens of millions of vehicles a year and in electricity storage systems, you're going to be recycling those batteries because you're going to be generating so much lithium scrap. These are our projections for the vehicle propulsion technology mix between now and 2015. On the left-hand side, millions of vehicles. On the right-hand side, market share. These are in line with the auto industry expectations, and they're roughly 1/3 of some of the projections you see from cobalt and lithium promoters. If you go out to 2050, you'll see that gasoline-powered vehicles still are expected to account for about 40% of the new vehicles made. Diesel vehicles will be 10-15%. When you add in hybrids, which will burn diesel or petrol gasoline, all of a sudden you're up to about 70% of the vehicles still using some form of petroleum. That means that you're going to be needing platinum, palladium, and rhodium to clean the exhaust. And it means that the lithium and manganese demand and cobalt demand for batteries will be somewhat slower than a lot of people are saying. And as I said earlier, it's not just electric metals, it's hydrogen too. We're watching the hydrogen market very closely, and we're working with a company that has a liquid organic hydrogen carrier technology that can safely and cheaply distribute hydrogen for use either in fuel cells or hydrogen engines. And then you have the whole issue of stationary storage. Storing the electricity generated in off-peak hours from nuclear power plants, wind, solar, and other forms of electricity generation, including hydro. In terms of lithium-ion batteries, right now the lithium-ion batteries we use in phones and computers use lithium and cobalt. The ones that we use in power tools and gardening tools and other things use lithium and manganese. And then if you get into the cars and the ESS system, you're going to be using lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, aluminum, iron, phosphorus, all kinds of metals that you may or may not use depending on what which battery technology wins. So in summary, there's a hierarchy of uncertainties about the future of motive power. What will be the future motive power? Will it be EVs? If it is EVs, what kind of battery technologies will we be using? If it is lithium batteries, what kind of metals will be used and what particular type of lithium battery technologies will be used? As I said, you have a lot of questions as to what the motive power of the future will be. Gasoline, diesel, compressed natural gas, battery-powered electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, fuel cells, hydrogen engines, or some mix of them in a transition period that may or may not give way to something new that you would ultimately be using. In addition to that, which vehicle battery technology? Lithium ions? If lithium ions, which batteries? calcium ion battery research is going along, could completely change the chemistry and the metal requirements of batteries. You have other people working on zinc oxide batteries or zinc air batteries. You have sodium and vanadium and other types of nickel metal hydride batteries that people have been looking at. And then if it is lithium technology, which of these metals are you going to use? So there's a lot of questions there. And then, as I said earlier, EVs are not as environmentally friendly as a lot of people believe. I was around in the early 90s when the EU government leaders said, oh, we should push and subsidize diesel fuel and diesel vehicles because diesel fuel is cleaner than gasoline. It's not. And we couldn't believe that they would make that argument. And we couldn't believe that they agreed to subsidize diesel fuel, and they browbeat the petroleum refining industry to spend hundreds of millions of dollars engineering their petroleum refineries to make more diesel fuel instead of gasoline, only to come along 15, 20 years later and say, oh, sorry, we're going to get rid of our diesel subsidies and go back to gasoline. And then we wanted to get rid of everything by 2050. It's just, there's a lot of inaccurate information and irrational expectations. These are our expectations of battery metal demand going forward. The big one is nickel. It's big, but because it's relatively small compared to the complete nickel market, it may have a far less significant impact on nickel prices. Our lithium demand, our cobalt demand, they are half to a third of what some other people say. Our manganese demand is probably double what a lot of other people say, because they didn't even realize that manganese was a metal in lithium-ion batteries until just recently. And they don't realize that a lot of the substitution away from cobalt sulfate is to manganese sulfate. And so the manganese demand is going to be much greater than the cobalt demand. My last slide has to do with fuel cells. As I said, I've been following alternative energy technology since the 1970s. And throughout the last 45 years, what we've seen is that the platinum industry and others have overly estimated how much platinum would be required in fuel cells. So in 1980, they were saying, oh, by 1988, we'll be using 350,000 ounces of platinum a year in fuel cells. And since that time, it's ranged from 250 to 350 to 400, 500, 600,000 ounces a year. And none of that's ever come true. It's never come true for three reasons. First off, fuel cells technologically are not viable. Even with all of the improvements we've seen, they're still not viable for on-the-road vehicles. They're good for fleets at airports or in warehouses or buses, but they're not really good for passenger vehicles. They're also not economically viable. And finally, fuel cell manufacturers have reduced the cost by getting rid of most of the platinum, more than 90% of the platinum that they thought they would need in 1980 is being used today. And almost all of the fuel cell manufacturers that we know have platinum-free technologies. So fuel cells probably won't come along as a significant part of the motive propulsion technology mix. And even if they do, they probably aren't going to require a lot of platinum. Thank you.